Hello. In this video, we start part 1 of chapter 9. And chapter 9, we are continuing our model, the Keynesian model, for explaining the macroeconomy by adding the government sector to the private sector. So our model comprised of so this is coming from, this flow diagram is coming from the chapter 8. We are going to add the public sector into this. So the public sector, we're going to add it. All right. And by doing so, these are our learning objective. What would be the role of government in the economy? So we discussed the influence of fiscal policies on the economy, as I just explained in the part 5 of chapter 8, the summary of the Keynesian model in a private sector only. So if we have private sector only and the government has no role, and the business cycles are very out of the control because they're all exogenous. The private sector, autonomous consumption or autonomous investment is fluctuating rapidly, and therefore the short-run equilibrium in goods and services market might be deviating from the potential level of output or long-run level of GDP. In this chapter, we are adding the government, and by adding the government, we say that there are discretionary fiscal tools to correct the economy. So that's the main purpose. And we do the multiplier effect analysis with the two sectors economy. And we will also explain the budget deficit in the federal government or in the national government. The emphasis would be in the book on the US economy in 3 different administrations, starting from Bill Clinton, then George W. Bush, and then the Barack Obama's administration. It would have been nice if the book would also add the Donald Trump, but we're not going to go to that detail. We just discuss the conceptual budget deficit policies, or the compare and contrast. We're not comparing, contrasting different government administration in the United States. We just explain that what would be possible of the budget to be in surplus or in deficit in general sense. Then we will move to economy's influence on the government. That was the aim which I mentioned in the part 5 of chapter 8, that it explains the influence of the economy by the fiscal policies. Okay, so that is the main role of explanation of what would be discretionary actions of the government to stabilize the business cycles. There are 2 appendix which both we are going to cover, and the appendix A is talking about the multipliers formulations, and the appendix B is making it the tax function a little bit more sophisticated than simple one explained inside the chapter. But both of them are useful, and the multipliers, and if the tax is proportional to the income level, how would look like the multipliers. Okay, so that's going to be explained in the appendix. So when we are talking about the government, and the fiscal policies in macroeconomics, there are two types of policies. One is the actions of the Treasury Department or Ministry of Economic Affairs or Ministry of Finance in every country. And this is called fiscal policy, the way that the government is changing its government spendings. If I want to government spending or the taxes. If they change these two components, then it's going to be affecting the economy. Alternatively, it's the central bank or Federal Reserves which influencing the economy through changing the money supply or influencing on the interest rate in real term or nominal. So if the central banks impose changes in the money supply or affecting or influencing the interest rate, this is called monetary policy. If the Ministry of Economic Affairs or Finance or Treasury departments, depending on which countries we are talking about, it is called the fiscal policy. So we have two types of the policies which the governments often acts. Actually, there is the third type. So this is the type 1 policy, type 2, and there is also type 3 policies. It's regulatory. This is where they change the regulations in terms of influencing the government, influencing the markets by setting, let's say, price floor or price ceiling, or specific regulations which just dictate the private sector based on certain regulations. So there's sometimes this was called income policies also. It's called income policies. So fiscal policy, monetary policy, regulatory policies are all sorts of policy actions. But in macroeconomics, our emphasis often is on these two types. So government in the economy, we want to add the government, and the government is tax and government spending. So if the tax and government spending is basically go up and down, they may change, and it affects the state of the economy. Okay, both T and G may be changing by the level of aggregate income. This is how endogenously may change. But what is more important is discretionary fiscal policy. These are deliberate changes in the tax and government spending, depending on the objectives or the goals of policies, government policy. If it is discretionary, it may affect and for the sake of stabilization policy. Whereas if they endogenously change, that is not going to be discretionary. So the government deliberately changes the T and G in a way that it influences the equilibrium level of output or the aggregate income. Okay, this is very important to be understood before we start. Okay, if we include the government into our economy, we'll have net tax. So tax is, we're charging the civilians, we are charging the citizens of the country. And in Oman, it's going to be started maybe in Ramadan, that income tax and the goods and services tax are going to be introduced. And basically every citizen, the government takes a little bit of its income, can be proportional, can be regressive, can be aggressive, depending on different structure they may actually develop. In the welfare states economies, in Scandinavian countries or in the United States, also it is usually proportional. If your income is increasing, you are going to pay more tax to the government. So that is the tax when we are charging the customers, the citizens, and dragging a portion of their income. This is called income tax. There's yet another type of tax, is called goods and services taxes. This is called indirect tax. Indirect tax, everything you buy from the market, a portion of it goes to the government. This is because on every purchase, a fraction of it, it's either called goods and services taxes or called value added taxes. The terminology used for indirect tax. So I can actually, before we do further explanation, the tax are two types: direct tax or income tax. So people get their pay slip. This is their pay slip. Pay slip is the income record, which I work in university or I work in a bank. They say this much money for let's say January, and then the tax which is paid to the government deducted, and this is the net salary. Okay, so certain amount minus the tax is become your net salary. So that income tax is directly deducted from people's income. Alternatively, it's indirect tax, and this is tax on goods and services, or value added taxes. These are other names, value added taxes. So whatever you buy from the market, you don't directly give it to the government. The government take it from the sales people. So you get your ticket, the receipt of your purchase. It says the price is this much, and add tax 5% or 10%, depending on how much is this is going to be added. Total charge. So the person receives this much, and they send the tax to the government. Okay, so this is called indirect tax. We are not going to talk about this one here. Most of our discussions is about direct tax or income tax. There is also transfer payment. This is like negative tax, because transfer payments, tax is when the government collects the money, and transfer payments is when the government pays to poorer family, pensioners, or any group of without their working, and the welfare payments. If unemployment, you are unemployed and you record it to the government that I have lost my income, then the government collects the tax from those who have job and pay to those who have lost their jobs or they are too old to work. So this is called transfer payments. Transfer payments is considered as negative tax. It's opposite. It's like the government is spending. And the alternative things is the government spending. Government spending is that G. So we could say that the budget of the government consists of tax, its net, we could say that minus transfer payments. Okay, so this is the net, and minus the spending. Altogether is called the budget. Budget, there are three possibilities. It can be zero. This is called balanced budget. So the amount which the government is spending is, including the transfer payments, is a match with the amount they charge their citizens. This can be positive. It's called the budget surplus. Can be negative. This is called deficit. Budget deficit when this, let's simplify to T minus G, ignoring the transfer payment. T, or when we say T, we are referring to the net tax. Actually, that is the way that it has been explained here. T is the net tax. Tax paid by the firms and households to the government minus transfer payments made to households by the government. So this is basically T. And the disposable income is after tax. So let's go back to our circular flow diagram, and now we are going to add the government in the middle. Okay, so this is our government, and I can now write the G. Okay, this is the government. The government, what it does, the government is taking a portion of people's income as the tax, including some payments to them. So net tax is often positive. The amount they gave transfer payments is always less than the amount they charge the people. So this is positively coming here. So up to here, the flow of income is Y. Then after this, it's become Y minus T. So this one, we call it disposable income, is always equal national income minus net tax. And we also know that the disposable income is either consumed or saved. So if you equate these things or put Y minus T is equal C plus S, it means that national income is either consumed or saved or taxed. So these two are leakage, because this is the main flow is Y comes here and it's flowing like this, and saving, we already said it is leaking. Another leakage is the tax. So these are called leakages for the two sector economy, private and public sector economy. And the government spending, we should show it with the red, is the amount of money which government is spending on buying goods and services. Okay, and we know that in this model, planned aggregate expenditure is going to be equal C plus I plus G. Okay, so we have on one side Y equal this, on the other side planned aggregate expenditure, and the equilibrium would be whenever Y is equal aggregate expenditure. This is equilibrium. And if Y is bigger than planned aggregate expenditure or Y is smaller than planned aggregate expenditure, these are disequilibrium. Similar to the discussion we had it in chapter 8. And we don't have the rest of the world, but that is going to be presented later in later chapters. So let me go back to our slides, and this is what the net tax and the disposable income was defined. The disposable income is called after-tax income. And the flow diagram here shown in the book is different from mine. I like mine because I have this squares are showing the players and the circles are showing the market, whereas here in the book is just showing the flows. Different books presents the flow diagram differently, so the markets are not determined here. That's the issue. The market is shown here, financial market, but the goods and services market are not well presented. This is the goods and services market, which is shown with the oval. All right. So now let's see what would be the equilibrium. The equilibrium, I already told you that it's going to be equating these two. So if we equate this, then we are going to have equilibrium. And if we do that, I just write it here, C plus S plus T. This should be equal to C plus I plus G. So C can be offset. And remember that these were the injections. So I told you that these are the leakages. And investment and government spending are the injections to the system. So leakages and injections, this is called the saving investment equation also, because it's investment saving. The first injections and save leakages as come from the chapter 8 model. It's also called IS equation. Okay, IS equation is the equilibrium. So equilibrium condition basically is going to be Y equal aggregate expenditure, similar to the chapter 8. And would it be balanced budget or imbalanced budget? Depending on the situation. So the budget, actually I showed it, the budget with income minus spending, that is, and if it is negative is deficit, if it is positive it's surplus. But if you write it like this, if you want to say budget deficit, it means that already G is is bigger than, so this becomes negative, it's a deficit. And if the G is smaller than T, then we are going to have a surplus. So I would go with this definition, because like profit, you say total revenue minus total cost. So you put first revenue, then the cost. This is also similar thing, but the governments are not a maximizer of their budget. They do not consider their budget as their profit function. So they collect money from the people and they spend for the people, and collectively it might be equal zero, balanced, and it might be negative, deficit, or surplus, might be all possibilities, which I just explained. So consumption function is still like the previous case. So we have autonomous consumption, plus marginal propensity to consume multiplied by the disposable income. So disposable income is the money which they obtain. It's unlike the previous chapter, because the tax was zero, national income was their income. So in this case, disposable income is y after tax, y minus tax. So this becomes our consumption function. So let me rewrite it. The components of the economy, we have private sector, the private sector is consumption, A plus B, Y minus T. So the T in the government sector is determined. And investment is I0, autonomous investment. So as I said it before, this is autonomous consumption, which is exogenous, and this is autonomous investment. And if we want to make it a little bit more interesting, just like the things which we discussed in previous chapter, we could say, sorry, I write it with minus C interest rate. Okay, so this we can put it aside, but in more realistic economy. And once we introduce the money market and the interest rate, we can bring it back. So investment, if the interest rate goes up, it's going to be decreasing. So it's the investment and interest rate has such a relationship. At lower interest rate, higher investment, and vice versa. So that the coefficient is, and the B is marginal propensity to consume, and it's lying between 0, it's positive, and it's smaller than 1. So this is the private sector, and we can add now the government sector's equation. Government sector, which we didn't have. Government sector. Government sector has two variables: net tax, T, okay, and the G. Remember we said that there is discretionary part. So discretionary is exogenous. When we say discretionary is discretionary components of T and G are exogenous. It means that they can control variables. It can be controlled by the government, discretionary, deliberate change. But can be portion of the tax or spending might be depending on the level of income. Okay, so we can say part of this T and G would be a function of Y. Part of it's independent from the level of the GDP. So in the simple model, we would say that all are discretionaries, T0 and G0. But in the Appendix B, we are making it tax as autonomous. This is called lump sum tax. Lump sum tax. Irrespective of how much the income level is, we are collecting this amount of tax for the government. And we are spending this much of the money buying final goods and services. So this is called autonomous spending. Autonomous spending for the government. But non-discretionary is there is a portion which is autonomous and it's lump sum plus a tax rate multiplied by the income level. So it's proportional. If it is proportional tax, might be like 5% of everyone's income or 10% of everyone's income, or can be basically there are three types. The tax rate, there are three types. It's progressive, it's regressive, and it's proportional. The proportional is fixed. No matter whether you are in a higher income group or lower income group, everybody pays, let's say, 30% of their production or income. The progressive, if you go to the higher bracket income, you pay more tax. So this is basically, there are different steps increasing. If higher income group, they pay more tax. In France, up to 70% for higher income group. Regressive is that if your income group is increasing, then you're paying lower tax. So that regressive is, some people may say that it is unfair. Progressive, they may say it is fair because the rich family pay more. Proportional, it's middle ground, that everyone is paying fixed amount of tax. So in the Appendix B, we have discussed this case. But in our simple model, we assume that the government is taking a lump sum tax from the whole citizens and spends lump sum amount of government spending. Is there like foreign sector? The foreign sector is negligible. Foreign sector. X and M is maybe net export is either zero or negligible. So this is later in other chapters, open economy. It's called open economy. If we have only the private sector and public sector and no rest of the world, it is considered as a closed economy. So closed economy. All right. So what is going to be look like the equilibrium in our model? So private sector is this. Instead of Y, we should put the disposable income after tax. And let's move On planned investment, we are assuming that the I is I nil. And again, I said that we could actually add minus C interest rate, but in this chapter we are not including that segment of investment. And the equilibrium condition, either this one or the I plus G equal S plus T. So these are the leakage, and these are injections, also called IS equation. The beginning, the first injection, the first saving. So this, if you want to determine the equilibrium, you should just equate this with y and solve it. So we have C, which is A plus B y minus T0, and I0 plus G0. This should be equal to the y. So the only unknown variable is now y, and we will solve it for that, and that is happening with the table. The first column is the income level or aggregate output. The second column is the tax. So we can say that how much is the disposable income. So 300 minus 100 is 200, and 1,500 minus 100. And pay attention that the T is considered as fixed amount. T is equal $100 million. That's the assumption. And that's also the assumption. And the investment is also 100. So now the consumption function is coming from the previous chapter. C equal 100 plus 0.75 YD. Now, instead of putting the national income, this time we put the disposable income. So 200 here, and we will determine the planned consumption expenditure by the household, 250. And as the disposable income change, this is also change. And then the saving would be disposable income minus the consumption is giving you the saving. So this is the saving. Planned investment as is assumed is 100, and planned government spending is also 100, and therefore the aggregate expenditure C plus I plus G is this column. And is planned aggregate expenditure, there are three possibilities. Y is equal aggregate expenditure, Y is bigger than aggregate expenditure, or Y is smaller than aggregate expenditure. To show this, we are showing in this column Y minus aggregate expenditure. Okay, so this is the Y. So this is column 1 minus column 8. And if it is equal 0, that is our equilibrium. So if I give you it's going to be exactly equal, and above this level of income, it is negative. So output have the tendency to increase, and below that is the outcome. The output has the tendency. If it is negative, the output should. If the Y is bigger than aggregate expenditure, the tendency is for the output to decrease. If the income is smaller than the spending, the tendency is to increase. So this is these are wrong. This should be decrease. This should be increase. Y should be increase. Y needs to be increase, and then we will have a stable equilibrium if everything else, all the exogenous variables are given, ceteris paribus. It means that the I0 and G0 and T0 are fixed. If they are not changed, then any change in the income will bring it back to the equilibrium. With the graph we can show it. I think there's a little bit of problem here because the 100 is not correct, but the C plus I plus G is shown here. Okay, and this is the consumption function. And then we top up the investment and the government spending each 100, so it becomes 300 plus 0.75 YD. Or this is basically 100. So the equilibrium level of income would be the intersection of the 45-degree line, which is showing the equilibrium, and the planned aggregate expenditure. So this is Y is equal aggregate expenditure, and the intersection of this brownish or purplish line, which is the planned aggregate expenditure, equal the aggregate output. That's the equilibrium. How much would be the level of income? The level of income would be this much. So with the equation we can solve it also. This is the saving investment approach or injection leakages approach, and that is also representing Y equal aggregate expenditure. So if we put the this together and we solve it, this is going to be offset, and leakages and injections are also alternative way. So let's do it with the equation we have with the numerical numbers and see how it will look like. So our consumption, I rewrite it, our consumption is 100 plus 0.75 Y minus 100, because the T is this much, and investment is fixed amount of 100, government spending is fixed amount, and the tax is, which has been shown here. Okay, so we have a balanced budget, so the budget is equal 100 minus 100 is equal 0. And what would be the equilibrium in this economy? Equilibrium would be, first, let's say aggregate expenditure is equal C plus I plus G. So the C is 100 plus 0.75 Y minus, and if you multiply that, it becomes 75. And so this up to here is the consumption. And then what is the investment? Investment is 100. And then we add the government spending. The government spending is 100. So this is I and this is the G. So this is aggregate expenditure. And the equilibrium is that we are equating this to 1. Okay, so the only unknown variable is now Y. So we can take this to the left. So it becomes 1 minus 0.75 Y. And then we can add them all. So it's 300 minus 75 becomes 300 minus 75. So it's become 225. And if you solve it, this is basically 0.25. So y is going to be 225 divided by 0.25. So this is going to be 900, and that is the way you can resolve it with the equations. Now we can move on. Let me stop it here, and then next would be the multiplier analysis. Multiplier analysis. So we did it with the table or schedule. We did it with the equations. And we did it with the graph. 3 different languages, mathematical languages for our analysis. I stop it here, and the next we would do what if exogenous variable change. This is called multiplier analysis. Thank you.